Martha Whitmore stood in the middle of Hollis Creek's main street in a black dress that had been black for 4 years now. And let the boy say it again, louder, so his mother would have to hear him. The mother heard him. The mother did not correct him. The word he used was a word for a thing, not a person, and it hung in the dust between the laundry's open door and the boardwalk where 2 men were leaning on the rail watching to see what the heavy woman would do. She did not flinch. She did not turn her head toward the boy. She did not press a hand to her chest or her face or her eyes. She bent, instead, and picked up the cloth bundle she had set down when the laundrywoman had told her, kindly, that there was no work. And she carried it past the boy and past his mother and past the man at the rail, walking the way she had walked since she was a girl, unhurried, with her shoulders straight, because her late husband, Eli, had told her once that a woman's back was the last thing the world could take from her if she did not give it, and something inside her cracked open. If this story already has your chest tight, do me a small kindness before we go on. Hit that subscribe button and follow Martha's story all the way to the end, because what happens to her on this mountain is the kind of thing a woman remembers a long time after the screen goes dark. Drop your city in the comments below. Tell me where you are sitting tonight while you listen. I want to see how far Martha's story travels. The spring of 1883 had come in mean and dry to the high country above Hollis Creek, and the dust along the main street rose to a woman's knee when a wagon passed, and Martha walked through that dust to the boarding house at the end of the street, because the boarding house was the last door she had not yet been turned from. She had begun at the feed store at first light and worked her way down both sides of the street in order, the way you would walk a fence line, methodical, refusing to skip a post, because skipping was a kind of begging too. The boarding house woman was a thin woman named Mrs. Pell, and Mrs. Pell came to the door, wiping flour off her wrists, and looked Martha from her boots to her bonnet and back, down again before Martha had finished her sentence. "I have no work," Mrs. Pell said. "I cook," Martha said. "I clean. I have run a kitchen for 14 years. I do not need a wage if you can give me a bed and a plate." "I have no work, Mrs. Bay," Pell said again, and her eyes went to the doorframe. And Martha understood. The way you understand a thing you have already understood 3 times before sundown. That the woman was measuring whether Martha would fit through the kitchen aisle without knocking the pans off the wall. Mrs. Pell did not say that. Mrs. Pell said, "Try the Calder place. I heard he's looking up the mountain. You won't like it." "Thank you," Martha said. She walked back up the street the way she had walked down it. The boy was not on the boardwalk anymore. The mother was not on the boardwalk anymore. The 2 men at the rail were still there, and one of them said something to the other, and the other one laughed without opening his mouth, and Martha did not look at them, because looking would have been a gift, and she had no gifts left to spend on men who had not earned them. At the feed store, she stopped and read the handwritten notice again, because she had not been certain, the first time, that the words said what she thought they said. Ranch hand wanted. Calder place, room and board. Inquire in person. The hand that had written the notice had not been a hand used to writing notices. The letters leaned. The ink had been thinned. The word person had been written and then half crossed out and then written again, as though the man who wrote it had thought briefly of writing man instead and had thought better of it, or had simply been too tired to choose. Martha stood and read it twice more. She had a borrowed mule waiting at the post outside the dry goods store, lent to her that morning by the only person in Hollis Creek who had not yet looked at her body before looking at her face. A Methodist woman named Ruth, who had known her husband and had asked after him at the funeral and had asked after him again every spring since. Ruth had said, "Take the mule. Bring her back when you can." Ruth had not said where Martha should ride. Ruth had only said, "Take the mule." Martha took the mule. Churt. The Calder place was 4.5 miles up a wagon track that climbed switchback through scrub oak and out into open pasture, under a sky so blue it looked painted. And the mule went up the track at the pace a mule will go when it is not in a hurry and is carrying a woman who is not in a hurry either. Because the mule was not hers to push, and because she wanted the time. She wanted the time to do what she had not let herself do on the boardwalk. She wanted the time to set the boy's word down somewhere where it would not travel up the mountain with her. She set it down at the second switchback, on a flat stone the size of a saddle, and she did not pick it up again. She had been a wife, and now she was not. Eli Whitmore had died in the second winter of his cough. And he had died well, which is to say, he had died telling her where the deed was, and where the seed money was, and what to do about the south fence in the spring. And she had done what he told her. And the next year, and the year after, she had let the place go to the bank, because there had been no help, and no neighbors, and no son, and no daughter, and she had walked off that homestead with 2 trunks, and the dress she had been married in, and the dress she was wearing now. She had come down to Hollis Creek, because Ruth had written her a letter. She had not expected the town. She had expected, she thought, something closer to grace, and the town had not given it. The town had taken one look at her, every door of it, and remembered something it had decided about heavy women a long time before Martha Whitmore had come riding in on a borrowed mule. The ranch house at the top of the track was a low log house, set into the hill, with a porch that ran the length of it, and a kitchen chimney on the north end, and a second chimney further down. The porch had been swept recently. Not well, but recently. The kitchen chimney was not smoking. The second chimney was smoking thin. There was a barn and a corral with a sag in the south rail, and an outbuilding for the hands. And beyond the buildings, a long fall of land down to a creek that ran fast and clear, and beyond the creek, the pasture climbed again into timber. Martha sat on the mule at the edge of the yard and let herself see it, the way Eli would have seen it, because Eli had taught her how to see a place, and what she saw was a ranch that had been a good ranch and was not a good ranch anymore. The corral rail had been broken 8 months at least. The kitchen chimney had been cold a long time. The thin smoke from the other chimney was wet wood smoke, the smoke of a man who did not split his wood until the morning he was going to burn it. She slid down from the mule and tied her at the rail, and walked up the steps onto the porch and knocked at the door. The man who opened it was tall and weathered, and standing in stocking feet, and he looked at her, and his hand on the door tightened, and the door began to close before he had decided to close it. Martha saw the door begin to close. She did not step back. She did not step forward. She stood, and she let him look, and she did not say her name yet, and she did not say what she had come for yet, and she did not look away from him, and after a count of 2, his hand on the door slackened, and the door stopped closing. That was the thing about Holt Calder. He had been about to shut a door on a woman, and had stopped himself. He could not have told you, later, what stopped him. He would have said, if you had asked him over whiskey, that she had not flinched. He would have said, if you had asked him sober, that she had stood on his porch, the way his wife, Sarah, had once stood at a hospital door in Denver when a doctor had told her she could not come in. Sarah had not gone in. Sarah had not gone away, either. Sarah had stood, and the doctor had after a while come out and let her in. And Holt had only seen Sarah do that once in 14 years of marriage, and he had remembered it, and he had been thinking of it, just now, without knowing he was thinking of it. I came for the work, Martha said. He looked at her. He did not look at her body. Exactly. He looked, but he did not flinch. He looked the way a man looks at a horse he is not sure about, weighing the chest and the legs and the eye, and not pretending he was not weighing anything. He took his time about it. Martha let him take his time. After a while, he said, "What's your name?" "Martha Whitmore." "Where from?" "East of here, off the Bitter Springs Road." "I had a place there." I had a place there 4 years ago. The bank has it now." "You drove cattle?" "I helped my husband drive cattle. I helped him with everything. He died." "How long ago?" 4 years. He stood in the door a long beat. He was a man who took beats. He was a man whose face did very little. She watched his face do nothing, and she thought, "He has not slept right in a long time," and she thought, "He does not know what to do with a woman on his porch," and she thought, "He is going to send me away." She set herself for it. She had been set for it all day. It did not hurt less for being set for. "I can give you 30 days, he said, "room and board. $2 a week, if you can do the work." "I can do the work. You haven't asked what the work is." "Whatever it is." He looked at her another long beat. Then he stepped back from the door and said, "Come in. I'll show you the bunkhouse and the kitchen, and the books, in that order. And you can tell me by sundown if you want it." She stepped in. The mule could wait. The house smelled like a man who lived in 3 rooms of an 8-room house. It smelled like wet wood and bachelor coffee and a dog that had not been in the house in months, but had once. There was a hall and a parlor on the left that had a sheet over the settee, and a kitchen on the right that was a kitchen. Martha could feel the closed up of before she could see it, because the door was shut, and the threshold dust was as thick as the threshold dust at the front of a house that has not been lived in since a funeral. Holt did not look at the kitchen door as they passed it. He did not look at it the way a man does not look at a thing on purpose. He walked her down the hall to the back, and out the back door, and across the yard to the bunkhouse. And he did not speak again until they were inside the bunkhouse and he was waving a hand at the long deal table and the cold stove and the 4 bunks and the smell of unwashed wool. "Wop? 4 hands," he said. "Tate, Reuben, Jess, Kobe Tate is the youngest. They eat at 6. I eat with them. There is no cook. The last cook left in February. What happened to her?" "Him? He left." "Why, he left?" She looked at the woodpile by the stove. She looked at the meal bin and the lard tin, and the salt jar on the shelf, and the strap of bacon hanging from a nail. She lifted the lid on the meal bin and looked at the meal. She closed it. She walked to the woodpile and picked up a splitting maul that had been leaning there with rust along the bit. She set it down. She turned to Holt. "I will have supper on the table at 6, she said. "I will need a sack of cornmeal that is not weevilled, and I will need beans that have been sorted in the last year, and I will need to cut the bacon off that strap with a knife I have not yet seen. If you have a knife I have not yet seen, I would like to see it." "There's a knife in the drawer," he said. "All right," she said. "Show me the books." He took her back across the yard, into the house, past the closed kitchen, into a small office off the parlor where a roll-top desk stood with its top half open and a stack of unopened letters on the blotter, and he pulled a drawer and lifted out 2 leather-bound ledgers, the smaller red and the larger black. And he set them on the desk and stepped back from them as though they were animals that might bite him. "My wife kept them," he said. "Sarah, until 3 years ago. After she died, I kept them. I have not kept them well. May I look at them? That's why I brought you in here." She sat down at the desk and opened the red ledger first. The red ledger was a household ledger, kept in a small, careful hand that liked to underline a total twice in 2 different colors of ink. The hand stopped on a page dated March of 1880. The next page in the red ledger was a different hand, larger, wearier, less even, and it had kept up for a few months, and then it had stopped keeping up at all, and the last 6 pages were blank. The black ledger was the ranch ledger, and the black ledger told a longer and uglier story, and Martha read it slowly, with one hand flat on the page the way her husband had taught her to read a page, so that her eye did not skip a line. She read about cattle sold, and cattle bought, and feed bought, and a wage paid, and a wage owed, and a note at the Hollis Creek Mercantile Bank, in the amount of $2,400, taken out in 1879. Sarah's small, careful hand, all the way to the spring of 1880, and then the payments in Holt's larger hand for a year after that, less regular, and then no payments at all, and a new column in a third hand, not Sarah's and not Holt's, in pencil, with numbers in it that did not match the numbers Sarah had been writing. And Martha let her finger come to rest on that third hand for a long, quiet beat before she lifted her finger and turned the page. She did not say anything to Holt about the third hand, not yet. "I can do this," she said. "I'd like the 30 days. "All right," he said, and he did not say anything else, and she thought, he was expecting me to say something else, and she thought, he was expecting me to say no. She put supper on the table at 6. She had not had time to do better than what was in the bin and the tin, and she would not the first night ask a man to ride into town to fetch her better, because a woman on her first night does not ask. She made cornbread in a skillet, and she made beans with the bacon. She cut off the strap with the knife she had finally been shown, and she made coffee that did not taste like the coffee they had been drinking, because she had washed the pot first, and she set it all down at the long deal table where the 4 hands sat, and Holt sat at the end. The 4 hands looked at her, and looked at the food, and looked at her again. The youngest, the one Holt had said was Tate, was a boy of maybe 19, with a long red neck and a wisp of a mustache, and a mouth that had not yet learned what mouths cost. The oldest was a man in his 50s, named Reuben, with a face like a wet saddle. Jess and Kobe were somewhere in the middle and had nothing to say. "What is that?" Tate said, pointing at the cornbread with his fork. "Cornbread," Martha said. "Tastes like cornbread my grandmother made." "Then your grandmother knew how to make cornbread." Reuben snorted into his coffee. Tate did not laugh. Tate looked at his plate and then at her plate, because she had made up her own plate and set it at the foot of the table, on the bench, and her plate had on it what she had given the men, neither more nor less, and Tate was 19, and Tate had not learned yet, and Tate said, "That's a small plate for you, ma'am." The table went still. Holt did not look up from his beans. Reuben looked at Tate the way an older hand looks at a younger hand. He is about to have to apologize for. Jess and Kobe looked at their plates. Martha picked up her fork and cut a square of cornbread off the slab on her plate, and put it in her mouth and chewed it and swallowed it, and did not look at Tate, because looking at Tate would have been a gift, and she did not have any gifts left to spend on boys who had not earned them. "It is the plate I was given," she said. "I only meant, I know what you meant, that was all." She did not say more. She did not say less. She finished her supper while the men finished theirs, and she rose and gathered the plates and washed them and dried them and set them on the shelf, and went out to the porch, and stood a moment in the dusk and breathed the cold high air, and went down the steps to the corral and looked at the sag in the south rail and decided in her head in which order she would do the work tomorrow, because that was what she did with the boy's plate comment, and that was what she had done with the laundry woman's no, and the boarding house woman's no, and the boy on the boardwalk, and his mother, and that was what she had done since Eli, and that was the shape of her now, a woman who put the thing into the work and let the work hold it. She did not flinch, she did not cry, she did not take up less room. She slept that night in the loft over the kitchen, which Holt had cleared for her without speaking, and she lay on the cot and listened to the house breathe, and thought of Sarah Calder's small, careful hand in the red ledger. and thought, that woman lived here, and that woman has not stopped living here. In the morning she was up before the men. She fed them. She fed them again at noon. She found the sick heifer on the second day. She had gone out with Reuben to look at the herd, because Holt had nodded when she said she wanted to see the herd, and the herd was thinner than the ledger said it should be, and one heifer, in the bottom pasture, stood with her head down, and would not lift it. And Martha walked through the wet grass to her in her black skirt and laid her hand on the heifer's neck, and felt the fever there, and walked back to Reuben and said, "She has been off her water 4 days, maybe 5. She is in calf, and the calf will not come right if we do not bring her in." Reuben said, "How do you know she's in calf?" "I have hands," Martha said. They brought the heifer in. Martha asked Holt for a quart of molasses and a pound of salt and a clean bucket and a length of soft rope, and Holt brought all 4 without asking what she wanted them for. And she worked the heifer for 2 hours, kneeling on a folded sack in the dust beside her, and at the end of 2 hours the heifer drank from the bucket and lifted her head, and let the rope off, and walked, unsteady, into the small pen Martha had asked Reuben to clean out. And by the morning of the 4th day, the heifer was on her feet, without a hand on her. And by the end of the 1st week the heifer had calved a live bull calf, small, but live. And Holt stood at the corral fence, and watched the calf find his feet, and did not know what to do with his face. He stood there a long time. Martha was at the head of the irrigation channel by then, half a mile down the slope, doing what she had told him the night before she meant to do, which was to clear by hand the silt that had settled in the channel head, over what looked to her eye like at least 2 seasons of neglect. He had said, "I'll send Tate." She had said, "I would rather do it myself the first time, so I can see how it sits." He had said, "All right." That was all he had said. He had watched her walk down the slope in her black skirt with a shovel over her shoulder, and he had stood at the corral and thought. In a way, he had not thought in 3 years that there was a woman doing his work in his pasture, and he was standing here watching her do it. He had felt, somewhere under the breastbone, a thing that was not relief, and was not gratitude, and was not yet anything he could put a name to, and he had not put a name to it. He had gone instead to the corral, and had stood at the rail, and had watched the new calf find his feet. And his face had done nothing, his face had not done in a long time. And he had walked back to the house, and stood outside the closed kitchen door for a minute and a half, and walked away from it again. The silted channel head took Martha 2 days. She did not ask for help, and Holt did not offer help. And on the 2nd evening she came up the slope with the shovel over her shoulder, and her skirt heavy with mud to the knee, and she said to Holt at the porch, "The channel is running. You will want to walk it tomorrow, at first light, and see what I have left for you to look at, because there is a place, a 1/4 mile down, where the bank has gone, and you will lose the water again in a hard rain if it is not shored." "All right," he said. "I would also like a sack of cornmeal that is not weevilled. I'll send Tate in the morning, and beans that have been sorted in the last year." "All right. And a wheel of cheese if Mr. Lacey has one." "He has one." "That will do." She turned to go in. He said, "Mrs. Whitmore." She stopped on the step. "That heifer was going to die," he said. "Yes. I owe you for the heifer." "You owe me my wage?" "That is not what I meant." She did not turn around. She did not turn around because if she turned around her face would tell him the thing under her breastbone, and the thing under her breastbone was not his to see yet. She said, "I know what you meant, Mr. Calder," and she went in. That night, after the men had eaten and the dishes were put away, and the lamp in the bunkhouse was out, she went into the small office off the parlor, and lit a single lamp at the desk, and opened the black ledger again. And she opened it to the page, with the third hand. And she copied every figure in that third hand onto a sheet of butcher paper she had folded inside the back cover the night before, and she copied every figure in Sarah's small, careful hand from the pages where the note was paid down. And she set them side by side on the butcher paper, and she ran her finger down the 2 columns. And she did the arithmetic in her head the way Eli had taught her to do arithmetic in her head. And she stopped, and she did the arithmetic again, and she stopped again. The note had been written at 8%. She could see the 8 on the front page of the ledger, in Sarah's hand, underlined twice in 2 colors. The third hand, in pencil, was charging interest on the unpaid balance, at a rate that was not 8. See? The third hand was charging at a rate that, when she worked it back, was somewhere near 22. And she did not know off the top of her head what the territorial law set as the lawful maximum. But she knew Eli had said once, sitting at their kitchen table in the Bitter Springs country, that no honest banker in any territory in the West charged a man more than 12, and she knew that whatever the law said, the rate in the third hand was not the rate on the front page of the ledger. She closed the ledger. She folded the butcher paper into quarters and put it under the blotter. She blew out the lamp. She went up the back stairs to her cot, and she lay down in her black dress because she was too tired to take it off, and she stared at the rafter above her head. And she did not name what she had just seen, not yet, because naming it would have made it real, and she did not have, yet, the thing she would need to make it real. She slept. The next morning Tate rode into town for the cornmeal and the beans and the cheese. She had told Holt the night before to tell Tate to ask Mr. Coppola. Lacey at the dry goods store whether he had any dried apples, and Tate came back at noon with the cornmeal and the beans and the cheese and a small sack of dried apples, and he set them on the kitchen table in the bunkhouse without looking at her, and he said, "Mr. Lacey said to tell you. He hopes you are well, ma'am. Mr. Lacey did not know I was up here. He does now? Whole town does. Whole town. Mrs. Pell at the boarding house has been telling it," she told Mr. Lacey. And Mr. Briggs, Lacey told his wife, and his wife told the laundry. She told them Holt Calder hired a woman, and they asked what kind of woman, and she told them which woman, and they laughed at her some, because they said it would not last the week, and she said it might because Calder has not had a hot meal in 2 years. "And what did you say, Tate?" Tate did not answer. Tate looked at the floor and rubbed the back of his neck and said, after a long beat, "I did not say anything, ma'am. All right." He stood there. He did not leave. He stood with his hand on the back of a chair and his hat off, and he said finally, in the voice of a boy who has not yet learned that an apology is not made better by saying it 3 different ways, "About the plate, ma'am. The first night? I want to say, I did not mean it the way it sounded." "You meant it the way it sounded." "Yes, ma'am." "All right." "I'm sorry, ma'am." "All right." He waited for her to say more. She did not say more because she did not have it to give to him. And a woman does not lie about what she has to give. And Tate, after a moment, set his hat back on his head and went out, and Martha listened to him cross the yard, and she stood at the kitchen table in the bunkhouse, a long beat with her hand on the sack of cornmeal. Lacey had sent and she breathed out through her nose, and she went on with the day. That evening Holt came to the bunkhouse for supper, as he had come every evening. The 4 hands ate. Holt ate. Martha ate at the foot of the table on her bench. There was venison stew, because Reuben had brought in a doe the day before. And there was cornbread again, because the men had asked for cornbread again. And there were the dried apples Mr. Daskris, Lacey had sent cooked down with a little of the molasses, and Reuben said, looking at the bowl of cooked apples, "Mrs. Whitmore, I have not had hot apples since my mother died in '71. "Then, your mother knew how to make hot apples," Martha said. Reuben laughed. He laughed a slow, rusty laugh that came from somewhere far down in his chest, and Jess laughed because Reuben laughed, and Kobe laughed because Jess did, and Tate did not laugh, and Holt did not laugh. But Holt put his spoon down for a moment and looked at her. And Martha looked at the dried apples in the bowl in the middle of the table, and did not look at him. And she felt his look, anyway. After supper, she heard them outside the barn. She had gone out to the porch to take the air because the kitchen in the bunkhouse was hot, and the bunkhouse door had banged behind the men, and the 3 older hands had crossed the yard to the barn to settle the horses, and Tate had crossed with them, and she could hear Holt's voice coming low, and even from the side of the barn she could not see. And she could hear Tate's voice answering, and she did not mean to listen, because listening was a thing women had done to her, for 4 years now, and she did not like it done to her, and she did not like to do it. She turned to go in. Then she heard Holt say her name. He said, "Mrs. Whitmore." And the name fell flat and even off his tongue. And she stopped on the porch step. "That woman has done more work in this place in 8 days than the 4 of you have done in the last 6 months, Holt said. "If I hear one more word out of you about the size of her plate or the size of her dress, or the size of any other thing about her body, you can ride down to Hollis Creek and not ride back. Do I have your word, Tate?" "Yes, sir, I mean it." "Yes, sir. She is not furniture. She is not a joke. She is hired." "Yes, sir. All right. Get on." Martha stood on the porch step a long beat. She did not move. She did not breathe out. She let it stay. She let it stay where it had landed, which was somewhere just under her breastbone, in the same place the thing about the heifer had landed the night Holt had said, "I owe you." And she felt it settle next to that other thing, and she thought, "Those are 2 things now," and she thought, "I have not had 2 of those in 4 years." She turned, and she went into the house, and she went up the back stairs, to the loft, and she sat on the edge of the cot in the dark, and she put both hands flat on her knees, and she breathed once, deeply, out, and the breath sounded in the dark like the breath of a woman who had not known until just then that she had been holding it. In the morning, Tate brought her a calf. He brought it on a rope, leading it, and he came around the side of the bunkhouse in the gray light, before the men were up, and Martha was at the stove, with the cornbread skillet in her hand, and Tate stood at the open bunkhouse door, with the rope in his fist and the calf nudging the back of his knee, and he said, "Whitmore, you asked after that little one out of the Wilson cow last week. Mr. Calder said you wondered why she wasn't taking her milk. I did wonder. It was an abscess at the base of the udder. We had not seen it. I cleaned it out and packed it. And she is taking. Now, this is her calf. He is sound. I thought you would want to see him." She set the skillet down. She came to the door. She looked at the calf, who was small and wet-eyed and curious, and had not been told yet what the world was like. And she ran her hand along his back, and felt the line of the spine and the depth of the ribs, and she said, "He is sound." "Yes, ma'am." "Thank you, Tate, yes, ma'am." He stood there. He stood there the way he had stood the night he had apologized about the plate, only this time he stood with the rope of a live calf in his hand, and the morning sun coming up over his shoulder, and the whole shape of him different, somehow, as though a thing he had been holding crossways inside himself. He is 19, and she thought. 19 turns fast, and she thought, my Eli was 19 when I married him. And she thought, that is enough now, and she said, "Take him back to his mother. Tell Reuben to keep the udder clean for another week." "Yes, ma'am." He went. That same afternoon, Eleanor Brand rode up from town. Martha was on the porch with a basket of mending in her lap when the buggy came up the track, and Martha watched the buggy come, and the buggy was a small black buggy with a black mare in front of it, and the woman driving was a small straight woman in a gray dress and a black bonnet. And she drove the buggy up to the porch, and set the brake, and climbed down from it without asking for a hand, and she carried in the crook of her arm a pie under a clean cloth. She was somewhere past 60. She had a face that had been pretty once, and had become, with time and with use, something better than pretty, which was clear. Her eyes were the kind of eyes that had taught children for 40 years and had not lost the patience for it. "You will be Mrs. Whitmore," she said. "I am, Eleanor Brand. I keep the school in Hollis Creek. I knew Sarah Calder, and I know Holt, and I had heard there was a woman up here, and I made a pie." She set the pie on the porch rail. She did not climb the steps. She looked Martha in the face for a long beat, and Martha let her look. And Eleanor Brand said, "I came to see whether the town had told me a lie, and I see now they did. They told me you had not lasted the week. You have lasted the week." "I have," Martha said. "They will not say it kindly when they have to take it back." "They do not have to say it at all." "No, they do not." Eleanor Brand smiled. A small, grim smile. "May I sit a moment, please?" She came up the steps and sat in a second porch chair, and Martha set the mending aside and folded her hands in her lap, and they sat a while without speaking, because Eleanor Brand was the kind of woman who knew when not to speak, and Martha was glad of her for it. After a while, Eleanor said, "Sarah Calder was a friend of mine. I want to tell you a thing, and I want you to do with it what you think best." "All right." Sarah kept every receipt she ever paid in this house, every one. She wrote on the back of each receipt the date and the number, and the man she paid it to, and she put them in a tin in her kitchen, and the tin was behind the stove on the right-hand side. On the second shelf of the spice cupboard, behind the cinnamon and the cloves. She showed me the tin once. She said to me, "Eleanor, if anything ever happens to me, you tell Holt where this tin is." I did not tell Holt where the tin was after she died. I could not tell Holt anything after she died. Holt would not let me in the house. Holt has not been in that kitchen in 3 years. Martha did not move. She did not let her face change. She felt the thing under her breastbone settle next to the other two things, and she felt it settle in a different place, deeper, and she said, "Why are you telling me?" "Because the bank is going to come for this ranch by the end of the summer," Eleanor said, "and Holt is going to lose it, and Sarah did not pay all those notes for nothing. And because the man who is going to take this ranch from him has taken 3 other places in this valley in the last 5 years, and he is taking them at a rate that is not lawful, and there is nobody in Hollis Creek with the back to stand up against him except, perhaps, a woman who has already been told by the whole town that she does not exist." Martha looked at her. Eleanor Brand looked back. Eleanor Brand had eyes the color of slate. "What is the man's name?" Martha said, although she already knew. She had seen the name in the third hand in pencil at the bottom of the page in the black ledger. She had seen it 3 nights running. And had not said it Aldous Marsh, Eleanor said. "All right. You are not surprised. I have seen his name in the ledger. I have not said it yet. You are quicker than I was told. I had a husband who taught me to read a page. Then you know what to do with what I have told you. I know where to start. I do not know yet what comes after. I will help you with what comes after," Eleanor said. "When you are ready, you will not be ready today. Eat the pie. Tell Holt I came." She rose. She set her hand for a moment on Martha's shoulder, and the hand was light and warm and dry, and stayed only a beat, and she went down the steps and climbed into her buggy, and turned the mare, and drove back down the track without looking back, and Martha sat on the porch with the pie on the rail and her hands in her lap. She did not move because she had to think. She thought about Sarah Calder, who had kept every receipt in a tin behind the cinnamon and the cloves. She thought about the kitchen door that Holt walked past every morning and every night without looking at it. She thought about the third hand in pencil and the black ledger. She thought about the 8% on the front page, underlined twice in 2 colors. She thought about Tate this morning with the calf. She thought about Holt at the side of the barn saying she is not furniture. She thought about her own hand on the heifer's neck. She thought about the boy on the boardwalk and the word he had used, and the word sat down beside her on the porch step and she looked at it, and the word was smaller than it had been a week ago, because she had given the week to other things and not to it. She stood. She picked up the pie. She went into the house. She walked down the hall and she stopped at the closed kitchen door, and she did not open it, because the door was not hers to open yet, and she walked on, and she put the pie in the pantry, and she went out to the bunkhouse and started supper. She did not tell Holt about the tin that night. She did not tell him because she had not yet decided how to tell him, and she did not tell a man a thing about his dead wife's kitchen before she knew how to tell him, and Eleanor Brand had said today, and Martha would say tomorrow, and tomorrow was a long day and there was time. There was less time than she thought. In the morning, before she went to start the bunkhouse stove, she walked out to the back of the house, where the kitchen chimney came down, and she stood under the chimney in the cold blue light. And she put her hand flat on the stone of the chimney, and the stone was cold, the way stone is cold that has not had a fire under it in a long time. I will tell him today, and I will ask him if I may go into that kitchen, and I will ask him in such a way that he can say no without shame, and if he says yes I will go in, and if he says no I will wait until he is ready, and I will not push him, because a man's grief is his own house, and a woman does not break the door down. She stood with her hand on the stone a long beat. Then she went around to the side and into the bunkhouse and lit the stove. She did not get the chance to ask him. She had finished the breakfast dishes, and Holt had gone down to the barn with Reuben to look at a wheel on the wagon that needed setting, and she was standing in the kitchen of the bunkhouse, drying a tin plate with a flour sack towel. And Tate came in the door fast and said, "Mrs. Whitmore, there is a man riding up with another man. They have a paper." She set the plate down on the shelf. She set the towel down beside the plate. She wiped her hands on her apron, and she took the apron off, and she folded the apron, and she set it on the chair, and she did all of this in the order she did it, because she had been a wife for 14 years, and had learned that you did not meet a man at your door with your hands wet. "Where is Mr. Calder?" she said at the barn. "I will fetch him." Fetch him. Tate went. She walked across the yard in her black dress, the dress she had walked Hollis Creek's main street in 8 days ago, and she stood on the porch with her hands at her sides, and she watched the 2 men come up the track. One was on a tall sorrel horse with a silver-bossed bridle and was wearing a town coat and a clean hat, and the other was on a smaller bay and wore the badge of a county deputy. And Martha looked at the 2 of them with her eyes and her hands and her breath all very still, and she did not say anything. And Holt came up from the barn with Tate behind him, and stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. "Mr. Calder," the man on the sorrel said, lifting his hat a polite inch and not coming down off the horse. "Aldous Marsh. We met 3 years ago, at your wife's funeral. I am sorry to call on you on a business matter." "What's the business?" Holt said. "The note, Mr. Calder." "The note on the bottom section. It is past due. It has been past due a long while. I am within my rights, as you know, to call it. I have called it. I have a paper here." He reached into his coat. He brought out a folded paper. He leaned down from the horse and offered the paper to Holt. And Holt did not climb the step to take it. So Marsh shook the paper out a little, lifted his voice and read from it, easy, in a voice used to reading from papers. Quote, "By order of the Hollis Creek Mercantile Bank, the property described herein, being the section south of the creek and the buildings appurtenant thereto, shall be sold at public auction on Friday next, the 22nd day of June, in the year of our Lord 1883, to satisfy the debt of $741.60, owed to the said bank, by one Holt J. Calder. The auction shall be held on the courthouse steps in Hollis Creek at 12 o'clock noon. All bids in lawful coin. Marsh folded the paper. The deputy is here as a courtesy, to witness service. I am not an unfair man, Mr. Calder. I would rather not see this place go to a stranger. We can talk privately if you wish. Holt did not say anything. Holt was looking at the paper in Marsh's hand, and his face had gone the way a man's face goes when a man is looking at a number he knows he never owed, and Martha watched his face, and she knew that face, because she had worn it herself on the porch of her own homestead in the Bitter Springs country 4 years ago, when the banksman had come with his own paper, and she knew that the next thing Holt was going to do was nothing, because the face he was wearing was a face that had run out of next things. She did not look at Marsh. She did not look at the deputy. She looked, instead, past Marsh's shoulder at the kitchen chimney, the cold one, the one she had stood under that morning. She had gone into the kitchen, in fact an hour before, while Holt was at the barn. She had gone in alone. She had not asked. She had told herself she would ask tomorrow. And then she had walked past the door and her hand had gone to the knob without her telling it to, and the knob had turned, because the door had not been locked in 3 years, and she had gone in. She had stood a moment in the cold kitchen, in the dust, in the smell of a room sealed up since a death, and she had walked to the stove, and she had reached behind it, and on the right-hand side, on the second shelf of the spice cupboard, behind a tin of cinnamon and a small brown bottle of cloves, she had found the tin. It was a tobacco tin. It said Navy Cut on the lid in red letters. Sarah Calder had used a tobacco tin to keep every receipt she had ever paid. Martha had taken the tin off the shelf, and she had carried it out of the kitchen, and she had set it in the loft over the kitchen, on the cot, under the pillow, and she had come down again and closed the kitchen door behind her. And she had not told Holt yet, because she had been going to tell him today. She had the tin. She had the tin upstairs on her cot under her pillow. She had not opened it yet. She had not had to open it yet, because the day had not asked her to, and the day was asking her now. Mr. Mar, the tenda, and R. Calder will need a minute, Martha said. Marsh's eyes came to her for the first time. He had not, she noted, looked at her once until she had spoken, although she had been standing on the porch in his line of sight the whole while. His eyes were a pale brown, and they did the same thing the laundry woman's eyes had done 8 days ago in Hollis Creek, which was to travel her from her boots to her bonnet and back without bothering to hide it. Then his eyes went past her, dismissive. "And you are," he said, not really asking. "Martha Whitmore. I keep the books here." "Since when?" "Since I came, Mr. Calder," Marsh said, looking back at Holt. "I had not heard you had hired anyone. My condolences on the necessity. I will require an answer by Friday. The auction is Friday at noon. I would prefer, as I said, a private resolution. Praff. Come down to my office in town tomorrow, and we will see what can be done." "That is to your benefit." Holt did not answer. Holt had not looked away from the paper. The paper was still in Marsh's hand. The deputy on the bay sat his horse and did not look at any of them. Martha looked, then, at the paper. Not at the front, because Marsh had not turned the front to her. At the back, which was creased and folded outward where Marsh had handled it, and where a date had been stamped in purple ink at the top. She could see the stamp clear from where she stood. The stamp was the stamp of the county recorder's office at the county seat. The date in the stamp was the 2nd of June. The deputy beside Marsh had ridden out to serve the paper today, the 12th of June. There was nothing remarkable about that. What was remarkable was that the foreclosure paper itself, in the line where Marsh had read it aloud, was dated as having been filed and posted on the 20th of May. Martha had not practiced law. She had only been a wife in a territory where her husband had read to her at night out of the territorial code because her husband had liked the sound of his own voice when he was reading. And she had a memory for the sound of his voice, and she remembered, hearing his voice say it, across 4 years, that no foreclosure paper in the territory could be served less than 42 days after it was posted, and the 20th of May to the 12th of June was not 42 days. The 20th of May to the 12th of June was 23 days. The paper had been dated 3 weeks before the law allowed. She did not say it. She did not say it because saying it now, on this porch, in front of this deputy, with Marsh sitting on his sorrel horse, would lose her the only thing she had, which was, that Marsh did not yet know she had seen it. She closed her hand, slowly, around something. She had not been aware she was holding anything. She looked down. She had come out of the bunkhouse with the flour sack towel still folded over her wrist. She had set the apron down. She had not set the towel down. The towel was in her hand, and her hand was closed around it, and under the towel, in the same hand, although she could not remember picking it up, was the tobacco tin from the loft cot. She had brought the tin down with her without knowing she had brought it. She had brought it because Tate had said paper, and her hand had remembered before her head had. The tin was warm from her palm. Sarah Calder's tin. Navy cut. The receipts were inside it. Every honest payment in Sarah's small, careful hand, underlined twice in 2 colors. "Friday at noon, Mr. Calder," Marsh said again. "I will expect you tomorrow at my office. Good day to you." "Good day, ma'am." He touched his hat to Holt. He did not touch his hat to her. He reined the sorrel around. The deputy followed. The 2 horses went down the track at a walk, taking their time, in no hurry, because men who carry papers dated 3 weeks before the law allows are men who are not in a hurry, because they believe the world is already theirs. Holt did not move. Holt stood at the bottom of the steps with the paper Marsh had left on the porch rail between them, and he did not look at the paper, and he did not look at her, and he did not say anything. He stood, trapped. His hands hung at his sides. The face he was wearing was the face he had worn watching the new bull calf find his feet at the corral fence, only emptied out, only with whatever had been behind it taken out and laid down somewhere where he could not reach it. Martha stood on the porch with the towel in her hand, and the tin under the towel, and she did not say anything yet either. She did not say anything, because what she had to say would take an evening to say, and the evening had not started, and a woman who has been turned away from every door in a town does not spend the first true card she has been dealt in 4 years on a porch in the middle of a yard in front of a paper. She looked instead past Holt, down the track where the 2 horses had gone, and she watched the dust settle, and she thought, calmly, in the cold, clear way Eli had taught her to think when a thing was coming. 3 weeks, the paper said 3 weeks early, and the auction is Friday, and that is 10 days, and 10 days is enough if we move tonight. And we will move tonight. And she let her hand close tighter around the tin under the towel, and she felt the lid of the tin against her palm and the cool metal of it under her hand, and she did not open it yet, and she did not say anything yet. And she stood on the porch of the Calder place, in her black dress, in the high blue noon, and she was not furniture, and she was not a joke, and she had not been invisible, only unseen. And she set her jaw, once, the smallest motion, and she turned her head, finally, to Holt, who had not moved, and she said, very quietly, only loud enough for him to hear, the first words of what was going to be a long night. "Mr. Calder, come inside. There is a tin I would like to show you." He came inside. He moved like a man walking through deep water, slow, and not quite trusting the floor under his boots, and he did not look at the foreclosure paper still curled on the porch boards where Marsh had let it fall, and he did not look back to where the deputy's horse had cut a long arc in the dust riding out. He looked at her, and then he looked at the tin under the towel in her hand, and then he looked at the kitchen door at the back of the front room, the one with the iron latch he had not lifted in 3 years. And his face did a thing that was not quite a flinch. Martha did not push him toward the door. She set the tin on the dining table gently, the way a person sets down a sleeping child, and she went and put water on for coffee at the front room stove, where he had been making his coffee for 3 years. Like a man camping in his own house. And she let him stand there with the door behind him. "Sarah's kitchen," he said. "Yes. I haven't opened it. I know. 3 years. I know that too," he breathed out. Once, like a horse settling, and he walked past her without looking at her, and he went to the kitchen door and put his hand on the latch, and stood with his hand on the latch. For a long moment, and Martha kept her back to him, not because she did not want to see. And she thought a man ought to be allowed to open a door like that without a witness. She heard the latch lift. She heard the hinges, dry from 3 years of nothing, give a soft complaint. She heard him step in and stop. She gave him a minute. Then she carried the tin and a lamp, and went in after him. The kitchen smelled of cold iron and old flour and a faint sweetness she could not name at first, and then could. Dried apple. Somewhere a string of it, gone leathery on a hook by the window. The stove was clean. Sarah had cleaned it the last time she used it. The way a woman cleans a thing, she means to come back to. There was a checked cloth, folded on the work table. There was a blue tin of baking soda with the lid set on at an angle, as if a hand had reached for it and been interrupted. There was a low shelf along the far wall with a row of crockery, and, on the end of it, a wooden box painted dull green, with a small brass latch and the word Recipes burned into the lid in a careful, schoolgirl hand. Holt was looking at the box. "That's hers," he said. "Yes. You found it this morning. Behind the stove. Wedged in against the wall. I think she put it there in a hurry once, and meant to move it back and didn't get to." He nodded slow. He did not go to the box. He sat down at Sarah's work table instead, on the stool he had probably sat on 1,000 times when she was alive, and he put his hands flat on the wood, and he looked at his hands and he said, "Show me." Martha set the lamp on the table. She set the tin she had carried from the porch beside it. She went to the green box on the low shelf and lifted it carefully in both hands, and brought it over, and set it down across from him. And she opened the brass latch, and she lifted the lid. Inside, on top, was a recipe for cornbread written out in a small, steady hand. Underneath that was a recipe for a remedy for cough, made with honey and a particular bark. Underneath that was an envelope. Underneath the envelope was another envelope. Underneath that was a stack of envelopes, tied with a brown ribbon, and underneath the stack was another stack. And at the bottom of the box, flat against the wood, was a leather wallet she recognized as the kind a man bought to carry papers in to town. She lifted the first envelope. She turned it over. On the back, in Sarah's hand, was written, "Marsh. May, 1880. 42, Marsh. Interest and principal, receipt enclosed." He looked at it for a long time. He did not pick it up. He read the back of it through twice, and then he opened it and slid out the paper inside and unfolded it, and read the receipt and read the back of the envelope again, and set the receipt down beside the envelope on the table, and he put his hand over his mouth. 3 years, he said, behind his hand. Yes, she knew. She kept everything. I think she was already worried. He took his hand away from his mouth. He set it back on the table. "Show me the rest," he said. So she did. She laid them out the way Eli had taught her, to lay out a thing she meant to understand, by date. Oldest first in a long single row across Sarah's table, each envelope above its receipt, each date and each figure showing. There were 31 of them. They went back almost 5 years. To the first year, Holt had taken the note out for the new south pasture. The spring Sarah had still been well. The earliest payments were in Sarah's hand on the envelope, and in Marcia's hand on the receipt. The last 6 were in Holt's hand on the envelope and Marcia's hand on the receipt, because by then Sarah was gone, and Holt had ridden down with the money himself, and he had given the envelopes to Sarah's box, because that was where they went. Then Martha opened the tin she had pulled from behind the stove. There were 9 more in there, slipped in by Sarah late, after she was sick. The last one dated 3 weeks before her death, 40 receipts in all. Then Martha brought the ledger from the front room, the one she had been copying figures from at night for 2 weeks now, and she opened it next to the row of receipts. She had her own paper, too, in her apron pocket. A column of dates, and a column of figures, and a column of differences, written out small in her own hand, the work she had been doing by lamp. "All right," she said. "Look here." She walked him through it slow. The note, she said, was for $1,800, taken in the spring of 1879 for the south pasture and a new well. The rate written on the note Holt remembered signing was 8%, which was the rate Marsh had told him at the desk, and which was at the upper edge of what an honest lender in this country charged, but lawful. The receipts in Sarah's box and the tin from behind the stove showed 40 payments, some small, some large, made when the season was good, totaling, by Martha's column, $2,317. The ledger Marsh kept, and showed Holt, every quarter showed a current balance, after all those payments, of $1,946. "That's more than I started at," Holt said slowly. "Yes? After 5 years of paying, yes. How?" "He has been charging you 22%, Martha said. Not 8. Not since the year Sarah took ill. I think he changed it on his books and not on yours, and I think he was counting on you not opening Sarah's box." Holt was very still. 22, he said. "Yes. That's not legal. The territorial ceiling is 10. I will need to see the statute on paper, but Eli used to say it, and Eleanor will know where it is bound." He sat with that. He did not curse. He did not stand up. He looked along the row of envelopes, the careful row Sarah had begun, and Martha had finished, and his eyes did a thing they had not done in 3 years, which was to fill. He did not let them spill. That was a thing about Holt Calder. He breathed past it. Sarah knew, he said again, quieter. She suspected. She was keeping records. She didn't get to finish. And you did. I'm finishing. He looked at her. Then plainly across the table in the lamp of the dead woman's kitchen, and he said, "Martha." "Yes, what do we do?" She had been turning that over since noon. She had been turning it over while she fed the men their supper, and while she scrubbed the pot, and while she watched the sun slide off the south pasture, and while she sat alone on the porch for a half-hour at dusk, with the tin in her lap, not opening it yet, waiting for him to be ready. She had been turning it over the way Eli had taught her to turn a thing over. Calm, in pieces, asking what was the smallest right step. 3 things tonight, she said, then more tomorrow. All right, first, we copy this row. I will write out a clean schedule of every payment, every date, against the ledger. Figure 2 copies, 1 stays here, 1 goes in your saddlebag tomorrow, when you ride to the county seat. All right, second, bought, 2. We send Tate at first light to the recorder in Bishop. The original note is filed there. Marsh will have his copy, and you will have yours, and his copy and yours both say 8, but the recorder's is the one that matters in a court. If he tries to swap papers, he can't swap the recorders. Tate is young, and he rides hard, and he owes you and he owes me a thing he hasn't named yet. Holt nodded once third. In the morning, I will ride down to Eleanor Brand and ask her to find the statute and to walk the town. Marsh has not done this. Only to you, he could not have. A man does not run one bad ledger, he runs many. Eleanor will know which ranches have been quiet about money. We will find them. They will come with us. To where? To a judge. If the circuit man is on his way, we ask for him. If he is not, we wire. Holt looked at the row of envelopes one more time. He picked up the very first one, the one in Sarah's hand, and he turned it over and read the back of it and turned it back. And he set it down exactly where it had been. All right, he said. All right, Martha. He did not move for a moment. Then he reached across the table, not for her hand, only for the lamp, and he turned the wick up a quarter turn, and he said, "Let's start." They worked until the small hours. She wrote the clean schedule in her own hand, slow and very neat, while he read the figures aloud one by one from the envelopes, and his voice, which had been a stone 3 years, came back into it a little, not all of it, not yet, but enough that, when he read the figure on the 8th receipt, the one Sarah had marked in her round 19-year-old hand from the year they had been married, he stopped and cleared his throat, and went on. Martha did not look up. That was a thing about Martha, Wad. She did not look up at a man's face when he was finding his way back through it. She kept her pen moving, and she let him have the kitchen. By 3 in the morning, she had 2 clean copies. By 3:30, she had set the green box back on the low shelf where Sarah had kept it. By 4, she had banked the stove in Sarah's kitchen and had not closed the door behind her on the way out, and Holt had not asked her to. And that small thing, the kitchen door left open onto the front room, the dead woman's room, joined back to the living one, sat between them on the porch when she stepped out for air, and neither of them named it. Tate wrote at first light. She woke him herself, not unkindly. With a hand on his shoulder in the bunkhouse dark, and a tin cup of coffee in her other hand. He sat up confused, his hair flat on one side, and he looked at her, like a boy looks at his mother, when he has done something wrong, and is not sure yet if she has come to scold him or to forgive him, and she said, very quiet, so the others would not wake. Tate, I need a hard ride from you. To Bishop. Now, yes, ma'am. You will go to the recorder's office. You will ask for the original notarized note on the Calder loan to Marsh. Dated March of 1879, you will pay the fee. You will not let it out of your hand. You will fold it inside your coat. You will ride back. If you have to sleep, sleep with it under you. Yes, ma'am. He did not say all right. She had noticed that he had stopped saying all right since the night Holt had spoken to him in the barn. He said yes, ma'am, plain and serious, and he meant it, the way a boy means a thing when he has decided to be a man about it. She gave him the coffee. She gave him a folded paper with the loan number and the date written out in her hand, and a second folded paper with $2 in it for the recorder's fee, and she said, eat at the way station. Don't push the horse on the downgrade. We will need him back. Yes, ma'am. He was gone before the sun was clear of the ridge. She rode down to town herself, an hour later, on the same borrowed mule that had carried her up the mountain 4 weeks ago, and she did not look at the boarding house where they had told her there was no work, and she did not look at the dry goods store where the woman had said politely they did not need extra hands. And she did not look at the laundry where the man had looked her up and down and said the work was hot and hard and she had best try elsewhere. She rode straight to the small white house at the end of the school lane, where Eleanor Brand lived alone, and she swung off the mule, with the slow, careful grace of a heavy woman who has been on a mule before. And she went up the path, and Eleanor opened the door before she could knock. Come in, Martha. There isn't much time. Come in anyway. Coffee is on. Eleanor Brand was 62 years old, and a widow of 21 years, and she had taught every child in Hollis Creek for 30 of those years, including the boy who had called Martha a name on the boardwalk her first day in town, and including Aldous Marsh, whom she had taught penmanship in 1849, and had not been fooled by since. She was small and straight-backed and gray and wore black, not because she was still mourning, but because she had decided once that black was easier and had not revisited the decision. She poured Martha coffee from a blue pot, and she did not ask questions until Martha had drunk half of it. "All right," she said, "then tell me." Martha told her. The receipts, the ledger, the rate, the deputy on the porch. The auction Friday. Tate writing to Bishop. The clean schedule in her apron pocket she could lay on the table if Eleanor wanted to see. Eleanor wanted to see. She read it through twice without speaking. Then she set her cup down and she said, 22%, yes, on a note written at 8. Yes. Aldous Marsh. Yes. Eleanor sat very still for a moment. Then she stood, briskly, the way a woman of her age stands when she has decided a thing. And she went to the bookshelf in her front room, and she pulled down a bound volume, the color of dried blood, and she opened it on her writing desk, and she ran a finger down a column of fine print, and she stopped, and she read aloud, "No person engaged in the business of lending money within this territory shall charge, contract for, or receive a greater rate of interest than 10% per annum upon any loan, advance, or forbearance of money, and any contract for a greater rate shall be void as to all interest, and the lender shall forfeit his license to lend within the territory." She closed the book. "Void as to all interest," she said. "All of it. Not just the part above 10. All of it." Then, by my count, after his payments, Holt Calder owes Aldous Marsh approximately negative $417. That is what I made it to. Marsh owes him the difference. Yes. Eleanor sat down again. She looked at Martha for a long moment, and her eyes were bright and dry, and she said, "Who else?" That is the next part. Quote, "I have an idea, who else." I thought you might. Eleanor named 4, unquote. The Henshaws, who had a small sheep place on the North Fork and had been mortgaged to Marsh for 6 years and had not, by Eleanor's reckoning, been able to put a new coat on either of their boys in 3. Old Bryce, the widower on the bench road, who had borrowed against his timber to bury his wife, and had been paying ever since, and was, Eleanor was certain, paying more than he ought to be. A couple newer to the country. The Lynns, who had come in with money, and lost it to a winter, and had taken a note from Marsh in the spring, and had gone quiet since. And the Carvers, who had a fine hay meadow Marsh had been eyeing for years, and a daughter being courted, and a sudden quietness in their house when money was mentioned. "I will walk to all 4 today," Eleanor said. "So, will you wire this circuit?" "I will wire from the station. Will you write the wire?" Yes, Eleanor wrote it. It was short and very plain. It named Marsh. It named the rate. It named the statute by chapter and section. It said witnesses were being gathered. It asked for a hearing on Thursday in the Hollis Creek schoolhouse, and gave reason for haste. Martha took it to the station. The station master, who had said 4 weeks ago that he had no need of help and had not looked her in the eye when he said it, read the wire, and he read it again. And he looked up at her and he said quietly, "Marsh?" "Yes." He sent the wire without charging her. She rode back up the mountain at dusk, and Holt was on the porch waiting, and he stood up when he saw her at the bend in the lane, and that, a man standing up when she came around a bend, was a thing she had not had done for her since Eli. "Tate?" she said, swinging down. "Not yet. Eleanor has 4. Good, the wire is sent. Good. She told him the rest at supper, which she cooked in Sarah's kitchen, and which Holt ate at Sarah's worktable on Sarah's stool, with the door to the front room standing open behind him. By morning, Marsh had heard. She did not know how he had heard. Exactly, the station master, perhaps, talking to the wrong man over a beer. Or the clerk at the recorder's office in Bishop sending word back up the line that a young writer had come for a particular original note. Or simply that a town the size of Hollis Creek could not hold a secret that Eleanor Brand was walking from house to house. By Tuesday at noon, Marsh had sent 2 men up to inspect the property, and Martha saw them coming half a mile off. 2 riders in town coats and bad hats, and she walked out to meet them at the gate with a rake in her hand, because she had been clearing chaff, and it had not occurred to her to put the rake down. "Ma'am," the taller one said, lifting his hat an inch. "Gentlemen, Mr. Marsh has sent us up to inspect the property in advance of Wednesday's sale." "Wednesday? Yes, ma'am. Auction has been moved to Wednesday at noon. Mr. Marsh has handbills going up in town today." She did not blink. She did not adjust her hand on the rake. She said, "On whose authority does a foreclosing lender move an auction up 2 days inside the notice period?" The man's face changed a little. "I beg your pardon, ma'am. I asked you a question, ma'am. I am only here to—" "You are here to walk this property at a man's order, who has no right to walk it. Mr. Calder owns this land. The note he signed is in dispute. The original is at the recorder's office, in Bishop, and a circuit hearing is set for Thursday morning at the schoolhouse. You are welcome to stand at this gate. You are not welcome past it." The shorter one shifted his weight. The taller one started to speak. She did not let him. "I will tell Mr. Marsh you came. I will tell the judge you came. Good day, gentlemen." She did not raise her voice. She did not move her feet. She held the rake the way Eli had held the rake, balanced, not threatening, and she looked at the taller man until he looked away, and then she looked at the shorter man until he looked away, and then they turned their horses around and went back down the lane, and then she walked back to the chaff pile and finished what she had been doing. Holt had been watching from the corral. "He came over after Wednesday," he said. "Yes." "He's running?" "Yes." "Will the judge come?" "Eleanor has had word back from the wire. Judge Whitcomb is in Pine Hollow and will ride over Wednesday evening and sit Thursday morning. I will ride down at noon and put a notice on the schoolhouse and on the bank door and in the feed store that the auction is void pending hearing. If Marsh tries to sell anyway, he sells against a posted notice from this house, and he sells to no one, because Eleanor will be on the steps." Holt looked at her. "You thought all this through last night?" "Some of it last night. Some of it on the mule this morning," he breathed out. "Martha, yes. I'm not most men. You know that by now." "I know. I would like to say it anyway. I have not seen the inside of a courtroom in 11 years. I will be there Thursday because you are there. I will speak if you tell me to speak, and I will sit down when you tell me to sit down." All right, that was the only all right she gave anybody that day. Marsh came up himself on Tuesday evening. He came alone without the deputy this time, because the deputy had ridden back to Bishop and the sheriff. There was a man who did not love Aldous Marsh, and had said, when asked, that he would not lend a man for any further service on the Calder matter until the court had a say. Marsh came up the lane in a black coat and a black hat in the long yellow light, on a sorrel that was too good for him, and he reined in at the porch where Martha was sitting with a basin of peas in her lap, and shelling them slowly, one by one, with the calm of a woman who has done it every June of her life. "Mrs. Whitmore." "Mr. Marsh." "Mr. Calder in." "He is in the barn. I have come to make him an offer that will spare him a great deal of public embarrassment." "You may make it to him." "I would prefer to make it through you." She set the basin aside, She did not stand. She put her hands flat on the arms of the chair, and she looked at him, and she let him see her looking. "Mr. Marsh," she said, "if you have come to offer Mr. Bray Calder half the value of his land in exchange for him going quiet, you have wasted a ride. He will not take it. I will not let him." A muscle moved in Marsh's cheek. He had not expected the number to be named. He had expected to lay it down himself, slowly, the way a man lays down a card. "You presume a great deal, ma'am." "I presume nothing. I have read the ledger." "The ledger. And the receipts." He went still. He went still, the way a snake goes. Still, not from fear, from calculation. He looked at her on the porch, and he looked at the lamp burning in Sarah's kitchen behind her. And his eyes flickered, just once, to the kitchen window. And Martha saw the flicker, and knew that he knew where the receipts had come from, and that he had been counting on a door that stayed shut. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said in a softer voice, "you are new in this country. You do not know the way things are arranged. Mr. Calder is a good man who has been through a great grief. He is not in a state to fight a complicated matter. If you push him into a fight, he will lose. You will not be doing him a kindness. You will be the woman who finished what his wife's death began." It was a knife laid down very neatly on the porch boards between them. She picked it up by the blade and handed it back. "Mr. Marsh," she said, "Mr. Calder will not lose the note in the recorder's office at Bishop says 8%. Your ledger says you have been collecting 22. The statute says a contract for above 10 is void as to all interest, and forfeits your license. 40 receipts in Mrs. Calder's hand, and in Mr. Calder's hand, sit on a table in this house. A circuit judge will sit at the schoolhouse Thursday morning. Eleanor Brand has spoken to 4 other men in this country. You have done this too. You have until tomorrow noon to withdraw the foreclosure and refund what you have over-collected, and if you do, I will not press for the license. After tomorrow noon, I will press for everything." Then he smiled, very thinly, and he said, "You are a bold woman, Mrs. Whitmore, for your size." She looked at him. She did not flinch. She did not speak. She did not stand. She let the silence go on long enough that the smile on his face thinned and then sagged and then was gone. And she said, very quietly, "Good evening, Mr. Marsh." He turned the sorrel and rode out. When he was past the bend, she picked up the basin of peas again and went on shelling them, and her hands were perfectly steady, and her face was perfectly steady, and inside her chest something was beating like a hammer on a tin roof, and she sat with it, and she shelled peas until it slowed. Holt came out of the barn. What did he want? What we thought, and he will not take it. He thinks I will fold by tomorrow noon. I will not. Holt looked at her. "Martha, yes, he said something to you. He said what men say, tell me." "He said I was bold for my size." Holt did not answer at once. He went and sat on the top step of the porch with his back to her and his hat in his hands, and he turned the hat slowly on his knee, and after a moment he said without turning, "He won't say a thing like that to you again. Not in this country. Not after Thursday." "All right," she said at that time, and she meant it. Tate came in at last, light, on Wednesday. He came in on a different horse from the one he had left on, because the first horse had thrown a shoe at Pine Hollow, and he had bought another with his own money from a man he knew there. And he came up the lane at a stiff trot with his face gray with dust, and his coat buttoned up to the throat in the warm dusk, because the original notarized note was folded against his shirt under the coat. And he swung off in front of the porch, and he walked up the steps to where Martha was standing, and he reached inside his coat, and took out a flat oilcloth wallet, and he handed it to her. "Ma'am." "Thank you, Tate. I didn't let it out of my hand. I see that. I slept on it. I see that too." She opened the wallet. The note was there on heavy paper, with the seal of the territorial recorder pressed into the wax at the corner, and the rate, written in a clear clerk's hand on the line provided, said 8% per annum. She closed the wallet. Quote, "Eat," she said. "Then sleep. You are riding into town with us in the morning." "Yes, ma'am." He went toward the bunkhouse. Halfway across the yard he stopped and turned back. "Mrs. Whitmore." "Yes. I am sorry about supper the first week." She looked at him across the yard in the last of the light. "I know you are. Tate, go eat." He went. That night in Sarah's kitchen, she drilled Holt on the figures one more time. She made him say the original principle aloud. She made him say the rate written on the note. She made him say the rate Marsh had charged. She made him say the total of his payments, and the figure on Marsh's ledger, and the figure Marsh ought, by law, to owe him. She made him say it without his voice breaking, and the second time he said it, his voice did not break, and she nodded once. Eleanor came up at 9 with a covered pie and a sheet of paper that had been folded and unfolded so many times the creases were soft. On the paper she had written in her schoolteacher's hand the order of the morning, who would sit where, what Holt would say when the judge asked him to state his name, what Martha would lay down on the table, first and second and third, when Eleanor would rise, what each of the 4 other ranchers would say in turn. She had run a small column down the right side, titled D.O. Not, and on it she had written, "Do not raise your voice, do not look at Marsh. Do not weep. Do not apologize for being here." Martha read it. She did not change any of it. "You will stand for me," she said to Eleanor. "I will stand for you." At the end. They sat with the pie and did not eat it. Holt slept 4 hours on the bench by the kitchen stove with his boots on, because he had said he would not sleep in the bed, and Martha sat across from him at the table reading the statute aloud to herself, quietly, in the lamp, until she had it by heart. Thursday morning, the sky was very blue. They rode down to town 3 abreast on the lane. Martha, on the borrowed mule, with the green recipe box wrapped in oilcloth across her lap, Holt, on his bay with the saddle Sarah had oiled for him in the year before she died, and Eleanor, on her gray mare, sitting straight and grim and small, and Tate rode behind with the original note still folded inside his coat, because Martha had said he had carried it this far and could carry it the last mile. And behind Tate came old Bryce on his gelding, and behind Bryce came the Henshaws. And the Carvers were already in town because they lived nearer, and by the time the road bent into the upper end of Hollis Creek, there were 9 of them riding in a quiet line, and the boy who had called her a name on the boardwalk. Her first day stood in front of his mother's store, and did not call anything this time. And his mother stood behind him with her arms folded and her mouth a hard line, and watched them pass. The schoolhouse was full. Word travels in a country town. Word had traveled. The benches were full, and the back wall was lined 3 deep with men who had taken off their hats, and women who had not taken off their bonnets. And the smell of warm wood and warmer bodies sat under the high beam, and the children had been let out for the day, because Eleanor had said the day would not be for children. Aldous Marsh sat at a small table on the right side of the room in his black coat, with a thin clerk beside him who held a leather folio against his chest as if it were a shield. On the left side of the room a second small table had been set for Martha and Holt, and on it she set the green box, and beside it the oilcloth wallet, and beside that her clean schedule of payments in her own neat hand, and beside that the bound volume Eleanor had carried under her arm with a strip of paper marking the page. Judge Whitcomb came in at 9. He was a long, thin man of about 60, in a coat that had ridden a great many miles, with reading glasses on a black ribbon around his neck, and a face that had heard every kind of lie and a great many kinds of truth and had become unsurprised by either. He sat at the teacher's desk because there was no bench. He set down a small wooden gavel because he had brought one. He looked once at Aldous Marsh, and the look was not warm. and he said, "I have heard the name of this lender in this court before. We will see if today is the day his name leaves it." He nodded at Martha. "Mrs. Whitmore, I understand from the wire that you are speaking for Mr. Calder in this matter." "With his consent, Your Honor." Mr. Calder Holt stood. "Yes, Your Honor, you consent. I do. Sit down, Mr. Calder. Mrs. Whitmore, you may proceed." She stood. She did not adjust her dress. She did not clear her throat. She put one hand flat on the schedule of payments, and one hand on the green box, and she said, in her ordinary speaking voice, which carried in that room, because the room was holding its breath, "Your Honor, in March of 1879, Mr. Holt Calder borrowed $1,800 from Mr. Aldous Marsh against the south pasture of his ranch at Hollis Creek. The note was written at 8% per annum. Mr. Prod Tate Conroy rode to the recorder's office at Bishop on Tuesday and brought back the original of that note. It is here." She opened the oilcloth. She unfolded the note. She laid it flat on the table, and she walked it forward and laid it on the judge's desk. The judge put on his reading glasses and read it. He looked up over the glasses at Marsh. He did not say anything yet. "Between May of 1879 and August of this year," Martha said, "Mr. Calder and Mrs. Calder before her death made 40 payments against this note in cash, and once in beef on the hoof at agreed valuation. Every payment was receipted in Mr. G.'s Marsh's hand. Mrs. Calder kept every receipt in her recipe box, which I am opening for the court now." She opened the green box. She lifted out the envelopes in order. "What?" She laid them in a long row across her table, and Eleanor rose from her bench and came forward and helped her, and between them they had the 40 receipts laid out in 5 neat rows of 8 by the time Martha spoke again. "The total of those payments is $2,317. Against a principal of $1,800 at 8% over 4 years and 4 months, the balance owed on this note today would be approximately $140, Your Honor." She paused. "Mr. Marsh's ledger, which Mr. Calder has been shown at every quarterly meeting, currently shows a balance owed of $1,946. A sound went through the room, not loud. A breath. "By my arithmetic," Martha said, "and by the same arithmetic Mrs. Brandt has performed independently this week, Mr. Marsh has been charging Mr. Calder 22% per annum, not 8, since the spring of 1881. He changed the rate on his ledger. He did not change the rate on the note." She turned to the bound volume. She opened it to the strip of paper. She turned it and slid it forward across the desk so the judge could read it, and she said, "Chapter 41, Section 9. Your Honor." The judge read it. He read it twice. He took off his glasses. He held them in his hand for a moment, and then he put them back on, and he said, in a voice that was not loud but that carried to the back wall, "No person engaged in the business of lending money within this territory shall charge, contract for, or receive a greater rate of interest than 10% per annum upon any loan or forbearance of money, and any contract for a greater rate shall be void as to all interest, and the lender shall forfeit his license to lend within the territory." He set the book down. He looked at Marsh. "Mr. Marsh, stand up." Marsh stood. His face was the color of paper. "Your Honor, you will speak when I ask you to." "Do you contest the original note as filed at Bishop?" "No, Your Honor." "Do you contest the receipts laid out on that table?" "Your Honor, those receipts cannot all be." "Are they in your hand, Mr. Marsh?" A long pause. "Yes, Your Honor." "Do you contest Mrs. Whitmore's arithmetic?" "Your Honor, the calculation is more complicated than—" "Do you contest the arithmetic, Mr. Marsh?" "No, Your Honor." The judge nodded once. He looked back at the schoolroom for a long moment. He looked at Holt, who was sitting very still, with his hat on his knees. He looked at Martha. He looked at Eleanor. He looked at the row of 4 ranchers on the second bench, and at old Bryce in the back, and at Tate by the door. The foreclosure dated last Friday on the Calder Ranch at Hollis Creek is void, he said. The auction set for this past Wednesday, which I am informed was attempted contrary to the notice period, is void. The note, as filed at Bishop, is void as to all interest pursuant to Chapter 41, Section 9, and Mr. Marsh is ordered to refund to Mr. Calder the sum of $417, plus court costs, within 30 days. Marsh's license to lend within this territory is revoked, effective today. I will be wiring Bishop and Carson and the 4 counties of this district by the close of business. Any party here today who believes himself similarly aggrieved by Mr. Marsh has 30 days to file with this court. The clerk will take names after I rise. He looked at Marsh again. Sit down, Mr. Marsh. Marsh sat. Then Eleanor Brand stood up. She did not ask permission. She stood up from the bench behind Martha's table, and she walked forward, and she stood beside Martha, and she put one small dry hand on the corner of the green box, and she turned, slowly, and she faced the room. Your Honor, she said, I taught nearly every person in this room. I taught Aldous Marsh penmanship in 1849. I will not say more about Mr. Marsh than the court has already said. I will speak instead about the woman who has stood at this table this morning, because no one else in this town has had the decency to speak about her, and I will not let her ride home today without that being put right. Martha did not turn. She kept her hands on the table. She kept her eyes on her schedule of payments. Mrs. Martha Whitmore came to Hollis Creek 4 weeks ago, a widow, Eleanor said. She walked the length of this street and asked for honest work at 3 places. She was turned away at the boarding house by Mrs. Pike, who is sitting in the 3rd row. She was turned away at the dry goods store by Mrs. Prack Hatcher, who was standing at the back wall. She was turned away at the laundry by Mr. Doyle, who is by the window. Not one of those 3 had any honest reason to turn her away. Their reason was the size of her body. While she walked back down the boardwalk, a boy called her a word. His mother did not correct, and his mother is standing at the back too, and we both know it. The room did not move. In the 4 weeks since that day, Eleanor said, Mrs. Whitmore has put a sick heifer back on her feet at the Calder place, has cleared the head of the irrigation channel that had been silted 3 years, has fed 9 men at a bunkhouse table without complaint, has read a ledger no man in this country thought to read, has matched it against 40 receipts kept in the careful hand of the late Mrs. Eyre. Sarah Calder has caused the original note to be brought from Bishop, has gathered 4 other defrauded men in this town in 1 day, has stood on her own porch and turned away 2 of Mr. Bury. Marsh's men, with a rake in her hand, has stood on that same porch and turned Mr. Marsh himself back down the lane, and has this morning, in this schoolhouse, by her own hand and her own voice and her own arithmetic, broken a fraud that has bled this country for 5 years. Eleanor's voice did not rise. It went, if anything, quieter. She has done all of this in a body you decided you could not see. She was not invisible, you closed your eyes. She looked at Mrs. Pike. Mrs. Pike looked down. Hatcher looked at the floor. She looked at Mr. Doyle. Mr. Doyle took his hat off and held it. She looked at the mother of the boy. The mother of the boy was crying, quietly, without any sound. That is all, Your Honor. She sat down. Judge Whitcomb waited a long moment. Then he picked up his small wooden gavel. He did not bang it. He set it back down. He said, This court is adjourned. The clerk will take names. Mrs. Whitmore, Mr. Calder, Mrs. Brand. He stood. The room stood with him. He walked out the side door. People did not move at first. Then they moved, slowly, in pieces, and the room began to talk in a low murmur, and several women came forward toward Martha's table, and several men came forward toward Holt, and the 4 ranchers stood up to give their names to the clerk, and Marsh sat alone at his table with his clerk gone from beside him, his hands flat on the wood in front of him. His face the color of the schoolhouse wall. Mrs. Pike came to Martha first. She did not know what to do with her hands. She said, "Mrs. Whitmore, I." Martha looked at her. She was not unkind. She was not warm either. She said, "Mrs. Pike, thank you for coming today." Mrs. Pike opened her mouth and closed it and went away. Mrs. Hatcher did not come forward at all. Mr. Doyle came halfway and stopped and went back. The mother of the boy came forward with the boy by the hand and made him say a thing to Martha that he could barely get out, and Martha said kindly to the boy, "It is all right. Go and learn from Mrs. Brand," and the boy nodded, and the mother led him away and did not look at Martha as she went, because she could not. Eleanor packed up the green box. Tate folded the original note back into the oilcloth. Holt put on his hat. They walked out of the schoolhouse together, and the sun on the steps was very bright, and Martha stopped at the top of the steps for a moment because she needed to, and Holt did not say anything, only waited beside her, and then they walked down the steps and to the rail where the horses were tied, and they rode up the mountain in the long afternoon light. Slowly, because there was no hurry now. They did not speak much on the way. At the lane, she said, "You will need to file the refund order at Bishop. I can write you the language. All right. And we will need to hire a second hand before the fall round. Tate can stay on, but he cannot do it alone. All right. And the south pasture fence is going at the corner where the lightning hit. I saw it Monday. I saw it too. And then we will mend it Saturday. All right." She did not ask him what he wanted to say. She rode ahead of him through the gate, turned the mule into the corral, and unsaddled it herself. And she carried the green box into Sarah's kitchen and set it back on the low shelf where Sarah had kept it, and she stood for a moment with her hand on the lid, and she said very quietly to a woman she had never met, "Thank you, Sarah." Then she put water on for coffee. He came out onto the porch at dusk. She was sitting on the top step with her hands in her lap. The light was going off the ridge. The cattle were settling down in the south pasture, and you could hear them from the porch. The small, soft sounds of a herd lying down the sky over the ridge was the color of the inside of a peach. He sat down beside her, not touching. "Close," he said. "Martha. Yes, I have a thing to say to you, and I am going to say it without flowers in it, because I do not have any. All right, I would like you to stay. I had thought I would stay." She did not answer at once. She looked at the south pasture. She looked at the fence line going gold in the last of the light. She looked at her hands in her lap, which were broad and strong and had cleared a spring, and read a ledger and laid 40 envelopes in a row on a dead woman's table. "Holt," she said. "Yes. I will say yes. I want to say yes. I am going to say yes. But I am going to say it on paper, and you are going to sign the paper, and I am going to keep one copy, and you are going to keep one copy, and Eleanor Brand is going to keep one copy in her writing desk in town. All right, my name on the deed, equal share. Not as your wife, as your partner. Yes. My hand on the books. All of them. The ranch, the bank, the feed account, the bill at the dry goods store. I sign and you sign, and either signature stands. But I see every line, and I write every line I please. Yes, no man speaks for me at any counter in this territory. Not you, not Tate, not the lawyer and Bishop. If a clerk addresses you when I am standing beside you, you will look at him until he addresses me. And you will not answer for me, even if I am slow. Yes. And if there ever comes a day, Holt and I do not think there will. But I have lived long enough to know that there might, if there ever comes a day when you wake up and look at me and the size of me is more than you can carry. You will say it to me plain and we will undo it the way we made it. On paper. With my name still on the deed and my share still mine. And you will not punish me for it and I will not punish you. He was quiet for a long time. There won't be that day. I know you mean that. I am asking for the paper anyway. You will have the paper, then, yes. He did not move at once. Then he reached very slowly, the way a man reaches for a thing he has not let himself reach for in 3 years, and he took her hand in his, her broad, strong hand in his thin, hard one, and he held it on the step between them, and he did not kiss her, and he did not draw her in, and he only sat with her hand in his. And after a long minute she lifted her other hand and laid it against the side of his face, briefly, and let it fall. I had been looking past you, he said. I know, until I wasn't. I know that too. The sun went off the ridge. The sky over the ridge went the color of the inside of a plum. The cattle were quiet. A night bird started up somewhere down by the creek, and somewhere up the lane a horse blew, softly, in the dark. They wrote the paper that night at Sarah's table in Martha's hand, with Holt reading every line aloud as she wrote it, and Tate as the witness, and they signed it both. And Eleanor came up the next morning and signed as the third witness and took her copy down to her writing desk in town. And on Monday Martha rode to Bishop with Holt and put her name on the deed at the recorder's office in front of the same clerk who had handed Tate the original note 4 days before. And the clerk looked once at Holt, and then looked at Martha and addressed her, and Holt did not answer, and the clerk wrote her name on the deed in a clean, steady hand. Marsh came to the door 3 nights later. He came on foot. His horse had been sold to settle an account. His coat was the same black coat, but it had not been brushed. His hat was in his hand. He had been ordered out of the territory by the close of the month, and he was leaving in the morning on the stage to Carson with a single valise. And Martha had heard from Eleanor that he had been to the door of every man he had defrauded and had been turned away from each, and that the Henshaws had set their dog on him. And that old Bryce had looked at him a long minute and shut the door without speaking. He came up the porch steps slowly. He stopped at the top. He did not look at her. Mrs. Whitmore, Mr. Marsh. I have come to say. Have you eaten today, Mr. Marsh? He looked up, his face did a thing. No, ma'am, come in. She did not say it kindly. She did not say it cruelly. She said it the way a woman says it when she has been turned away from every table in a town, and has decided by herself, in her own kitchen, what kind of woman she will be. He came in. He stood in the front room with his hat in his hand. Holt was at the table and looked up once at Marsh, and once at Martha, and said nothing, because they had spoken about it earlier in the day, when Eleanor had sent word that Marsh was making the rounds. Martha set a plate. She put on it a slice of beef, and a heap of beans, and a square of cornbread, and a small dish of stewed apple from the string Sarah had hung in the kitchen 4 years ago, that Martha had soaked back to softness. And she set it across from Holt, and she set a cup of coffee beside it, and she said, "Sit, Mr. Rock." Marsh. He sat. He ate. He ate slowly, the way a man eats who has not been fed by a hand that did not want to harm him in some time. He did not look at Holt. He did not look at Martha. He looked at his plate, and once at the open kitchen door behind Holt where the lamp was burning on Sarah's work table. When he was finished he set his fork down. He folded his napkin. He put his hands on either side of the plate. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said very low, "I do not know why you fed me. I know why. He waited. "Because I was turned away from every table in this town the first day I came," she said. "And I learned that day what it costs to be hungry in a town that has decided not to see you. And I decided on the porch this evening when I heard you on the steps that I would not do to a man what was done to me, even a man who has earned it. That is all. It is not forgiveness. You should not mistake it for that. It is a plate. Well." He nodded. Slowly he put his hands flat on the table. He stood. "Thank you," he said. "Mr. Calder, Mr. Marsh, Mrs. Whitmore. Good evening, Mr. Marsh." He went out. They heard his step on the porch and the step on the lane, and then they did not hear anything. Holt looked across the table at her. "You are a harder woman than I am, Martha. No, I am a fed woman now. A fed woman can spare a plate. A hungry woman cannot. That is all it is." He nodded. He stood up. He came around the table, and he took her hand again, the way he had taken it on the porch step, and he held it a moment, and then he let it go, and he went into Sarah's kitchen and banked the stove for her, because she had been on her feet since dawn. She sat at the table a little while longer. She thought about the first day. She thought about Mrs. Pike at the boarding house, with her hand on the door frame, not opening it all the way. She thought about the boy on the boardwalk and the word he had used. She thought about Holt at the door of the ranch house 4 weeks ago, almost shutting it on her before something in her stillness had stopped him. She thought about Sarah's recipe box behind the stove, where a careful hand had hidden it. She thought about Eleanor standing up in the schoolhouse and naming every door. She had been told in 100 small ways since she was 12 years old that a body like hers was a thing to be looked past or laughed at, or turned away at a counter, or seated at the back, or addressed through someone smaller, or fed last, or not fed at all. She had been told that her worth had to be earned in spite of her body, that if she worked hard enough, kept quiet enough, ate small enough in public, took up little enough space, she might, on a good day, be allowed to be useful. She had never believed it. That was the thing about Martha Whitmore. She had never believed it, even when she could not say so out loud, even when Eli was the only person on earth who agreed with her, even when she was alone on a porch in a borrowed black dress with a tin of receipts in her hand in a town below her that had refused her 3 times in a single morning. She had never been invisible. They had only closed their eyes. She stood up from the table. She blew out the lamp in the front room. She left the lamp burning in Sarah's kitchen because Holt was still in there, and because the door between the 2 rooms was open now and would stay open, and because the worth she carried was not the size of her body and never had been, and she had earned every acre of the ground under her feet, and a man on this mountain had seen her, not in spite of her, not past her, but plainly in a high blue noon on a porch in a black dress with a tin in her hand. And she walked across the front room in the warm dark toward the open door and the lamp, and she went in.